Lakers security is currently scrambling to suppress the footage, but word has already spread. Shaquille O'Neal just cornered LeBron James in the tunnel following the Lakers' recent humiliating loss to the Knicks, and it nearly escalated into a disaster. It all began with this.
Because the game is different. Like, I want people to understand, and our fans to understand, that playing 82 games in the 80s and 90s is not the same as playing 82 games in the 2020s.
According to insiders and eyewitness accounts, by the time the game concluded, Shaq was already positioned in the tunnel, blocking the pathway to the locker room. And he posed one question that made the entire Lakers entourage freeze. By this point, Rob Pelinka was already panicking, attempting to keep them separated. And LeBron realized his latest podcast comments didn't merely go viral. They ignited a beef with the only man powerful enough to end his legacy. Wait until you hear the question Shaq used to shut down LeBron's entire camp, and why insiders claim this marks the beginning of the end for LeBron. Look, if you thought that podcast clip was explosive, the footage the Lakers are attempting to scrub right now exists on a completely different level. We're discussing a night that was supposed to celebrate longevity, but ended up resembling total collapse. So it's February 1st, 2026, and the Lakers just got absolutely demolished at Madison Square Garden. They lost 112-100, and honestly, it wasn't even that competitive. OG Anunoby and Landry Shamet were essentially treating the Lakers' defense like a warm-up drill. Luka Doncic finished with 30 points, while LeBron finished with 22. But man, he appeared every bit of 41 years old out there. After the game, he was walking through the MSG tunnel, probably already contemplating what excuses to drop on the next pod, when he encountered a literal wall. Shaq was simply standing there leaning against the concrete, and he wasn't there to perform a funny ESPN bit. He was 325 pounds of pure 90s era, don't play with me energy, and he was straight up blocking the route to the locker room. People who were right there reported the atmosphere shifted from 0 to 100 instantly. Shaq didn't even acknowledge him. He looked LeBron dead in the eye and delivered a line that made everybody stop cold. How are you going to call this hard when you play in a league where even looking at a dude too long is a technical foul? And naturally, LeBron tried doing that thing where he explains high-level basketball, discussing pace, space, and how the game is faster in 2026. But Shaq wasn't buying any of that. He cut him off and barked back. Pace doesn't matter when nobody is allowed to touch you. You're only talking about speed because you're scared to admit your body isn't what it used to be, and you're playing in a soft era. Then Shaq went for the jugular. He went straight for Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid, and all the other NBA players who have been missing games and used them as the ultimate proof. Shaq's entire point was that in his day, you played until the bone was showing. Today, these guys missed 3 weeks because they landed a little awkwardly. He straight up called LeBron delusional for that podcast take. But that's not even the craziest part. This confrontation got so intense that people actually had to intervene, trying to pull Shaq away from LeBron. You got the Lakers personnel in suits attempting to pull a 7-foot tank away from their player, while the non-technical staff was simply standing in the shadows observing the entire situation unfold. And just wait until we examine the actual numbers from back then, because what we discovered proves the NBA in the 90s wasn't just physical, it was a completely different sport. But look, before we dive into that, you have to understand why Shaq finally lost his composure. Shaq is essentially the last of a dying breed, one of the only guys who actually experienced both sides of this. He's witnessed the game transform from actual basketball to the soft, lazy game we have in this modern era. He entered the league in '92 and was trading elbows with 80s enforcers who were literally trained to take your head off if you breathed on them too hard. He saw the hand-checking rules vanish in 2004. He saw the flagrant foul rules transform into a safety net, and he watched the floor space out until there was nowhere to stretch it anymore. So when he hears LeBron discuss the game being harder now, it feels like a slap in the face to every legend who actually had to fight for a layup. And don't let the speed argument fool you. LeBron likes to discuss the pace being higher today, but if you examine the actual numbers, he's basically just doing math in a vacuum. Back in the 1984-85 season, the league average pace was 102. In 1985-86, it remained right there at 102. And right now in 2026, the league average has actually dipped back down to around 99.5. We're discussing the 1984 to 85 Denver Nuggets operating at a staggering pace of 107, a number that would make most modern teams collapse by the third quarter. What about the Showtime Lakers, who were consistently clocking in over 100? The difference, however, is that they were accomplishing it while getting hand-checked, clotheslined, and shoved into the front row. There was no freedom of movement back then. There was just survival. You want to discuss hard? Look at the Jordan rules. The Detroit Pistons didn't just have a defensive scheme. They basically had a set of instructions on how to assault Michael Jordan without getting arrested. If MJ went to the rim, he was getting put on the floor. Period. There were no flagrant ones for unnecessary contact. Now compare that with the life of an NBA superstar in 2026. LeBron spends over $1 million annually on body maintenance, cryo chambers, hyperbaric oxygen, private chefs, and flying on custom private jets where he can sleep in a full-size bed. Back in the 80s, Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson were flying commercial, competing for armrest space with random fans and sleeping in regular hotels. Shaq actually highlighted this in April 2025 when he straight up stated LeBron's longevity is a byproduct of playing in a soft era.
It's less physical. And he's always done this his whole career. He's never really done that. So, but the fact that it's less physical, I think it definitely helps.
He wasn't lying. If LeBron had to fly coach and get hacked by Rick Mahorn every night, he certainly wouldn't be playing at 41. Even the GOAT himself, Michael Jordan, weighed him back in June 2025. MJ didn't just question the competitive fire of these guys. He exposed the entire load management culture and discussed how he missed the times when we had genuinely committed players in the NBA.
That type of competition, that type of competitiveness is what I live for, and I miss it. I miss that aspect of playing the game of basketball.
Jordan played all 82 games in 9 different seasons, and Kobe Bryant famously played with a broken finger and refused to sit out. But today, LeBron's camp defends resting whenever knee feels slightly stiff. That's why Shaq's Netflix Power Moves list from earlier this year was such a significant statement. He was asked to rank his top 10 players, and he positioned MJ at 1 and Kobe at 2. LeBron, he slid down to 3.
Number 3, I'm going to go with the King, LeBron James. Number 2, I'm going with rest in peace, Kobe Bean Bryant. And number 1, the greatest player of all time is Michael Jordan.
And Shaq's reasoning was straightforward. It's about the killer instinct. Jordan didn't need a podcast to tell you how challenging it was. He just went out and demonstrated by dismantling everyone in his path, regardless of how many times they attempted to break him. But if you think Shaq is the only one who's fed up with the excuses, you haven't heard what Paul Pierce had to say about LeBron's speed theory, because he didn't just disagree. He went nuclear on him. However, look, the genuine reason Shaq finally lost it in that tunnel isn't just about some podcast episode. It's because for guys who actually built this league, LeBron is missing the one thing you can't purchase with $1 billion. The fear factor. Shaq's been declaring it all through 2025 and 2026. He literally told the world nobody was scared of LeBron.
I didn't think players really feared LeBron like they did Jordan.
Never really heard any players say they fear LeBron.
Which is valid because with LeBron, you respect the stats, sure, but nobody was losing sleep. Nobody was thinking, oh, LeBron is playing today. This is going to be a nightmare for me. But when you went up against MJ or Kobe, you knew they were coming to take your soul. You weren't just worried about a loss. You were terrified of getting embarrassed and having your spirit broken in front of everyone. Now just imagine how the league transitioned from that warrior energy to the soft, buddy-buddy podcast culture we've got now. LeBron is out here doing pods with Tyrese Halliburton, laughing and joking like they're at summer camp. It's a total shift from the 90s, which is why in Shaq's list, he made it official. MJ at number 1, Kobe at number 2, and LeBron at number 3. Shaq played with both of them. And he's telling us that if you need a bucket to save your life, you're calling the Mamba, not the guy who's worried about his brand and being everyone's best friend at 41 years old. And if you think the 90s were just slower, go back and watch the 1989 Pistons versus Bulls series. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, and Charles Oakley weren't playing defense. They were doing the closest thing to an actual assault charge. Bill Laimbeer was always there to make sure Larry Bird left the court with an injury or 2, which was just standard basketball back then. And guess what? Larry Bird still showed up the next night, ready to dominate the court again. If all of that happened today, you'd probably get an automatic ejection and a 3-game suspension. But you'd think at this point, LeBron would have learned to shut up and respect those who came before him. But no, this guy actually had the nerve to say on that podcast that calf injuries are the new high ankle sprains.
I think when I first came into the league, Reese, some of the biggest concerns of injuries was like, a high ankle sprain. You was afraid to step on somebody's ankle because there was 4 or 5 guys sitting in the paint. Because there was 4 or 5 guys sitting in the paint. And if you land on somebody's ankle, you get a high ankle sprain, you out 4 to 6 weeks. Now, that's not really much of you don't really see that as much now because the game is so spread open, it's so much pace. But now you see the new high ankle sprain is the calf.
Like, the game is so fast today that these minor injuries are just as severe as what they faced in the 80s or 90s. Shaq almost lost his mind at that take, especially since he spent an entire career getting hacked like a tree. What about Isaiah Thomas? Remember what he endured in the 1988 finals? Isaiah was playing on one leg, literally hobbling with an ankle swollen to the size of a grapefruit, and he still dropped 25 points in a single quarter. But according to LeBron, his era with the rest days and billion-dollar budget is harder. Oh, and his other favorite excuse is that the 80s NBA was just 4 guys sitting in the paint, like they were just unathletic figureheads. But Shaq took that personally too. You're discussing Hakeem David Robinson and a young lean Shaq. These weren't sitters, they were predators. They were 7-footers who could run the floor and protect the rim in a way that would make these modern big guys look like children. Well, Shaq was recently asked by NBC News for his fantasy all-time starting 5. He went with MJ, Kobe, Karl Malone, Larry Bird, and Hakeem Olajuwon.
So if you had to do your all-time NBA starting 5, do you have one?
Kobe and Mike.
Okay.
That's the 1 and the 2. The 3, I gotta go with Bird.
Okay.
4, I gotta go with Malone. And 5, I gotta go with Hakeem.
You left somebody out.
No.
He left LeBron out entirely. He even left himself out as well. Yeah, that's how serious this is. When the interviewer asked him about LeBron, Shaq didn't even blink. He basically implied that if he's building a team to win, he needs guys who aren't worried about their podcast downloads. But if you think Shaq was the only one ready to crash out over those podcast clips, you clearly didn't hear what I said earlier about Paul Pierce's reaction. Because the truth didn't just disagree. He basically took LeBron's whole speed and pace theory and threw it in the trash on live TV. Pierce hopped on his new podcast, No Fouls Given, and he looked like he was about to jump through the camera. He's sitting there with Danny Green, who is actually attempting to defend the modern game, and Pierce just cuts him off mid-sentence. He goes, LeBron is talking about speed, man. We played in the 2000s when you actually had to fight through a screen. Now you just switch, fall asleep, and call it advanced defense. Pierce's entire point is that this speed LeBron is bragging about is fake because the refs don't let you touch anyone. Back in the day, if you tried to run a high-speed transition without a plan, a guy like Ben Wallace or Kevin Garnett was putting you into the basket stanchion. There was a physical tax you had to pay just across half court. And look, you have to remember the history here. This isn't just some random old head talking. Pierce and LeBron have been at each other's throats since that 2008 Eastern Conference semifinals where they both dropped 40 in Game 7. That was when the NBA still had some form of grit and that 90s Warrior mentality. They used to trash talk each other in the preseason, literally. And Pierce has never forgotten that LeBron had to go to Miami just to finally get past him. To Pierce, LeBron is attempting to pretend the game is harder now because it justifies why he's struggling to keep up with the young guns in 2026. And when you think about it, you begin to wonder, for someone who used to be so competitive in his prime, how come he's advocating for a soft era now, exactly at a time when he's getting too old for the game? Pierce even doubled down, stating, the switching defense today is basically a cheat code for lazy superstars. In the 90s or the 2000s, if you were guarding a star, you stayed on his hip, you fought through the elbow, you slid under the screen, and you dealt with the bruises. Today, you just point at your teammates, switch the jersey, and hope the other guy misses a wide-open 3.
Yeah, mentally
so many times I'm bruised up after the game. My shoulder hurts.
It's definitely more physical.
It's hurting.
So why were more guys playing 75 games a year then?
Because it was tougher. Well, now you're switching everything.
He ended the segment by essentially calling the modern era sanitized. He told Danny Green straight up that the only reason these guys are putting up these historic numbers is because the enforcer has been hunted to extinction. You can't be a Charles Oakley or a Rick Mahorn anymore because you'd be suspended for the season by November. But here's the most shocking part of all of this. On January 29th, for the first time in 21 years, basically a lifetime in basketball, the NBA announced the All-Star starters, and LeBron James wasn't on the list. Think about how insane that is. This dude has been a guaranteed name for the All-Stars since most of us watching this were in high school. But the league finally moved on. Luka Doncic is the new face of the Lakers, and the fans, the media, and even the players themselves basically voted LeBron into the legacy bin. In the final voting results for the Western Conference frontcourt, he tied for 9th place in the media vote with 3 total votes and finished 9th in the overall weighted rankings. 9th? That's essentially an eviction notice. And honestly, nobody wants to see a 41-year-old dragging the team down anymore. The narrative that it's harder now is the only card he has left to play. Think about it. If the game is actually faster and more physical, like he claims, why are guys playing until they're 40? In the 90s, the game literally chewed you up and spit you out by 33. If you played 40 minutes of what was basically a wrestling match every night, there's no way you were staying until 40. LeBron playing this long isn't proof of longevity or greatness. It's proof that he's playing in a sanitized era where you can load manage your way to a 2-decade career. And Shaq smelled the blood in the water immediately. When the Inside the NBA crew was picking their reserves on January 29th, Shaq straight up left LeBron off his list, but he did it with a twist of the knife.
A few players that's only been slowed down because of their age. I don't want to see the king coming off the bench.
So you don't even want to see him at the game at all?
No.
Don't get it twisted. That wasn't a compliment. That was Shaq telling the world that the king is basically a charity case now, and he'd rather just not see him there at all. Even Charles Barkley didn't hold back. Chuck dropped a bomb saying LeBron is done with LA and predicted he's heading for a retirement tour back in Cleveland.
Well, there's one thing I'm sure of. This is last year with the Lakers. He's not going to play with the Lakers next year. I've always said I'd like to see him finish in Cleveland. I'm not opposed to him getting traded to Cleveland this year.
Now it's all making sense. LeBron already knew those all-star results were going to be a disaster for his brand. So he dropped that podcast as a preemptive strike. He wanted to change the conversation to a competition between him and MJ before the world saw that the league doesn't even think he's a top 5 player in his own conference anymore. And the worst part for LeBron? The Lakers legends themselves are siding with Shaq. Magic Johnson did an interview back in September 2025 where he didn't even hesitate. He chose MJ as the GOAT because of his dominance and not longevity stats.
That's what make him a bad boy and the best that's ever done it. Don't get it twisted. I love LeBron, but
Magic basically told the world that staying in the league forever doesn't make you the best. It just makes you a long-term employee. For Shaq, being a Laker isn't some brand move or a way to sell jerseys. It's a religion. He's the guy who delivered the last three-peat this league has ever seen from 2000 to 2002. He remembers what it actually took to win those titles. It wasn't about pace and space or doing podcasts with teammates. It was 48 minutes of getting beaten into the dirt by teams like the Spurs and Kings who were literally built just to stop him. He had 7-footers like Vlade Divac and Chris Webber taking shots at his ribs every single possession. So when LeBron goes on a pod and tries to act like playing today is harder because he thinks the game is faster, it's not just a bad take to Shaq. It's a straight-up insult to Lakers history. And honestly, the rest of the Lakers family is over it too. On January 28, 2026, 5-time champion Ron Harper, who lived through the Jordan Bulls and the Shaq-Kobe Lakers, finally saw enough. He saw that clip of LeBron comparing calf strains to high ankle sprains, and he didn't even write a paragraph. He just dropped a forwarded post on X. These excuses is stupid. To put this in perspective, Ron Harper is 62 and he's still got more enforcer energy than half the guys in the league right now. He's looking at LeBron like, bro, I was 36, starting 80 games a season and guarding the best player on the floor without $1 billion budget or a cryo chamber. To guys like Shaq and Harper, LeBron isn't just defending the modern era. He's attempting to rewrite the struggle they actually endured just to make his own longevity look more impressive. It's reaching a breaking point in Los Angeles because the fans who grew up on Magic Showtime and Shaq's dominance don't want to hear about soft tissue injuries. They're witnessing a 41-year-old who seems more concerned about his podcast downloads than the Lakers' defensive rating. The wildest part about this entire meltdown is the pure hypocrisy of it all. LeBron spent his whole career acting like the ultimate student of the game, constantly shouting out the legends when it fit his chosen one narrative. But the second the debate actually gets tight, he flips the script. Suddenly, the era that produced MJ and Shaq wasn't tougher. It was just slower and easier. It's a classic ego move. LeBron knows the 2026 All-Star snub wasn't a fluke. It was a signal that his time is up. So he drops these podcast takes as a preemptive strike. He's basically saying, if I'm not winning now, it's because the game is harder for me than it ever was for Mike. But you can't have it both ways. You can't claim to be the GOAT because of your longevity stats while simultaneously admitting the only reason you've lasted this long is that the league transformed into a non-contact sport. If the 90s were so unathletic, then why did it take a superhuman like LeBron until 2026 to realize he couldn't even make an all-star starting lineup? At this point, LeBron has officially burned his bridge to the inner circle of NBA greatness. He thought he was being clever, but all he did was prove he isn't on the same level as the legends before him. You can have the scoring title, LeBron. You can play 25 seasons in a sanitized, no-contact league. But you'll never have the respect of the men you just called inferior. The line is drawn. So for you watching this, you gotta choose. Are you rocking with the 90s enforcers who played through blood and broken bones? Or are you sticking with the podcast king? The legends have made their choice, and they're standing with Shaq.